Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kine kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te ata akura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora.
No mai haere mai ki te whare toi. My name is Graham Frost. I'm the Public Programs Specialist here at City Gallery Wellington Te Whare Toi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our final event for our partnership program with the Wellington branch of Te Herenga, the New Zealand Institute of Architects. Today's panel discussion is held in conjunction with the South Australasian Cities Conference, and so it's my pleasure to welcome our panellists for this evening. Just before I hand over to Hannah Hopewell, our chair for the evening, to introduce the panellist and herself, I'm just going to leave you with a couple of very brief housekeeping pointers. It's unlikely that we'll have an emergency in this space. If we do, please just remain calm and remain in your seats. We have staff on site who can attend to any issue. If we need to evacuate the space, we will let you know that that's necessary. And if we do need to evacuate the space, there is an emergency exit just up at the far end on your left. There is also another emergency exit as you leave the auditorium from the doors, the main doors, again, just on your left. If we need to evacuate the building completely, we'll be rallying at the Blue Mat just beside Nicole Cafe. And lastly, should you need to use the restroom, the wharepaku, there are a set of restrooms on your right as you come out of the main doors to the auditorium. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Hannah, and please enjoy tonight's panel discussion. Thank you.
Ngā mihi, Graham. Thank you so much for that and hosting us in this beautiful auditorium, and thank you, Antonia, for opening us up. Lovely to see you all, sort of, with the blinding eyes. So, no mai haere mai, welcome. Welcome to a yarn with us wahine here on the city. So you all know why you're here. We're here to talk about the changing city, in terms of how we might think about it in the future. And now I've just forgotten what exactly was I going to say. Okay. So to kick off, I guess we should say, well, ko wai tātou, who are we? And I want to invite each panellist to introduce themselves.
Talofa lava, malo. Kia ora everybody, my name's Eljyana. I am Samoan Australian, so love that there's more Australians here in the room. And I grew up in Porirua, which is 20-minute north from here. My background is in architecture and urban design, and I studied overseas for a little bit, and I've been back in Aotearoa since February, working on a project that is based in Porirua, which I'll talk about in a minute this afternoon or this evening. And yeah, my background, I did my architectural project on reorientating the city towards the harbour in Porirua. So it had a kind of very urban city focus, and the architect was kind of the role of the designer, the community engagement person, the artist, the activist, the cousin, the niece, all of those things that are involved in urban spaces. So it's an honour to be here amongst you all, and thank you, Hannah, for allowing me to be a part of this panel. Kia ora.
Kia ora. My name's Libby Porter. I am an uninvited guest living on Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Nurra-Ilum-Wurrung lands in the place across the water, the continent of so-called Australia. It's very wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me, and deep respects to Mana Whenua Freem here and fellow panellists. It's wonderful to be in conversation with you. I am a What else do I do? I am a researcher and educator at RMIT University. It's lovely to have colleagues here in the room at the Centre for Urban Research and teaching in the discipline of sustainability and urban planning. So I'm a planner, geographer, urban studies kind of person, trying to figure out what our responsibility is as a white fella living on unceded lands and what that means to make places in that context.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, he mihi māhana tēnei ki a koutou katoa I tēnei wā. No te wharetapu o Ngāpuhi a hau I te tau o tōku māma, no horana me ingarangi o kutupuna I te tau o tōku pāpā, ko Antonia tōku ingoa. Kia ora I te whānau. It's a privilege to be sitting here amongst these inspiring wahine today. I'm currently doing my thesis on kind of reshaping our architectural methodologies in response to he hurunga āhuarangi, our changing environments, foregrounding some of our Indigenous methods. So yeah, excited to go over some of the kōrero with you all today.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Nicole Thompson, and from the accent you may be getting the sense that I too am Australian. No I te whenua moimoi a e noho ana o ki Pōneke, I te whenua, I runga I te whenua te atiawa me Ngāti Toa. So I am from Australia, but I have lived here in Wellington now for 100 years, as you can probably tell. It has been a good 100 years, though. I really love it here, and it's fantastic to be sitting with all of these big brains on this side of the room. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot tonight. I'm a landscape architect by training. That's my official title, but I kind of think of myself more as a curator, as someone who it's about thinking about how space can be developed, but that's not necessarily adding to space. It might be editing space, it might be shifting some things around, or it might just be revealing something that's already there. So for me tonight, I'm very excited to hear what these wonderful wahine have to say, and I'm looking forward to some questions, some tricky ones for them, but just easy ones if you're giving them to me. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nicole. Ki te pai. I'm Hannah Hopewell, and I'm a researcher and a practitioner of urban design and landscape architecture with Toa Architects, and it's a great privilege to be here with you today. So I'm going to open the kōrero with a phrase from the late, great Moana Jackson. He used the phrase, finding the future. So this term, finding the future, seems fitting for this evening's discussion, or yarn, as it's one of the central ambitions of urbanists. We like to consider, what might be to come. Urbanism is like a congealing set of ideals, ideas, knowledges, with no one single meaning or perspective. It has a projective quality, whilst deeply attending to the knowledges of the past and the present. So it's with this sort of, this orientation towards finding the future that we open this conversation. And I'd like to pose the first question to Eljyana. So we're in a situation currently, and have been for a while, where it's quite obvious this generation has inherited cities in urban form arising from colonisation and the sorts of spatial logics that have emerged with capitalism. So it's that capitalist machine that renders land as finite and as enduring basis of any collective dwelling as a kind of financialised and individualised object. So it's that kind of set of equations that we find ourselves finding it hard to kind of emerge from or get out from. So this kind of approach, or this form of impacts on urban it evidences winners and losers, and in recent years, accelerating spatial and environmental injustices. So residential housing, its organisation and its different forms, is a fundamental facet here. Can you tell us, Eljyana, a little bit about the current ecosystem here, or the current housing ecosystem here in Aotearoa, and offer some thoughts about how we could or should diversify approaches? And perhaps is there any realm or value-based system within housing provision that has perhaps been invisibilised, just made that word up, or disregarded by decision makers and therefore excluded as a factor of fostering our future communities? Mihi.
Sounds like she's asking me to solve all the housing. Well, I firstly want to acknowledge that there are many people in this room who've been thinking about housing for a lot longer than I have. And therefore I don't have all the answers for housing in Aotearoa. But I do want to offer some thoughts of the way the project that I'm currently, because many architects in this room will use the project as a way to think through, society and urbanism, etc. So I am currently the project lead, which is kind of project design lead, master planning lead for a project called Awhare Awhale, which is to deliver and to build up to 300 homes in Eastern Porirua. So Eastern Porirua is... the history of it is, without going into too much detail, it's basically was zoned for a lot of state housing. So the predominant stock of the housing is state, and it has the highest majority of Pacific Island and Māori. So a lot of Pacific Island people that are there, which is where I'm from. So the project. So Kāinga Ora, if you're familiar with Kāinga Ora, who are the government's housing or urban development arm of the government, that have set up a large-scale project to, invest in, 200 million into the infrastructure and to do urban regeneration. What they think is urban regeneration, but actually it's now just urban renewal, which is just replacing the existing stock with new houses. So it's not kind of actually looking at the wellbeing outcomes that it was initially set up to do, which is, in one hand, that is a really frustrating part, but it also provides an opportunity for the organisation that I'm a part of. So I work for an organisation called Central Pacific Collective, which is a wellbeing organisation for Pacific people in the Wellington region, and they are the ones who are doing the 300 homes. So I was like, they needed an architect or somebody as an urban designer, but not just anybody, somebody who also understood the culture, because it's very, the community is very socially charged, but also very socially protective. And so they don't just want anybody who comes into these communities to say, we need one-bedroom state houses, which never gets built. And the current situation of what has happened is you have, for the state housing, you will have development managers who will go out and set the strategy and say, everybody's saying they need a one-bedroom. And so they will do a 50-unit development, half of those will be one-bedroom, and then it's taken them, over a year to fill those one-bedrooms, because many of our Pacific people, there are, 9 people living in a 3-bedroom house. And you have a mother who's working, a father who's working, the older 2 kids will be working, and everyone else will be at school. And so that kind of translation in terms of the value system, I think the reason why our housing ecosystem is the way it is, because it comes back to what we value. And we have set up our housing to value the individualistic kind of, this is my plot of land, this is your plot of land, this is my fence and this is your fence. And I think the opportunity that we have, particularly for this project as Pacific, is to return to some of those fundamental aspects that create my relationship to your relationship in terms of a Pacific village. And what that looks like, it doesn't necessarily look like a fence and a your own specific backyard. Okay. Yes. So in terms of affordability, So we've got 300 homes. We have Ngāti Toa. It's the first partnership of its kind between any Pacific organisation and mana whenua. So Ngāti Toa own the land, and we have a leasehold agreement on the land, which basically removes the equation of the land. And then we have a shared equity model as well as part of that. So the family can purchase we may own up to 40% of that initial entry. But the challenge is that for a lot of our families, even that is still very difficult. And so what is in between affordable housing and market housing, there's a gap. And I know that, many of us will be familiar with some of the models that might provide for the gap, community land trusts, cooperative, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that I'm thinking about at the moment. And
so I'm hearing from you that being value-led, the kaupapa in this particular Pacific collective is sort of putting values first and having to adapt towards, I guess, the market as well.
Yes. It also means that the actual organisation that are thinking about housing is different. So because I've worked in a traditional architecture practice, the organisation has been very intentional that it's being led by the community, which means that it's being led internally. So, we have designers in-house, i.e. just me and one of the guys that's my colleague that's sitting on the stairs, who are thinking through, how do we design for our big Pacific families and in an affordable way, in a way that actually creates community? Because for us, it's not just about providing the dignity of what it means to own a home, but it means how are you also providing jobs?
So we're in the space of value-led relationality in a way that's really distinctively Pacific.
Yes.
So watch this space with what you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to turn over to solve architecture now. Now we've done housing. So Antonia, you've been the student of architecture the last 5 years and are just on the precipice of entering the non-student life. I could call that something else. And we're really interested in your thoughts on what the role of the architect is today, or in terms of making, or we could say remaking the city. So you've dedicated the past 10 months specifically to asking the question through design how architecture might attend to changing climates, and particularly to the impending demand of marae across the motu facing relocation and forms of displacement again. So what is the role of the marae in Aotearoa's urbanism? And more questions, what do you think architecture has to do to keep itself fully relevant in this space? And tell us all about indigenisation, will you? Just tell us about your project.
Yeah, so just to tautoko what Eljyana said about being new to the space, I guess, in comparison to a lot of people in this room, quite intimidating to be sitting here, but I guess our environments are changing and it's pretty daunting and a pretty scary place, and we need to start making changes here and now, especially in practice, just to start off. So, yeah, my thesis has kind of been centred around the shaking up of the architectural practices within as a response to our changing environments, using some of our more indigenising methods, as I mentioned earlier. So what is the marae for some of you that are not from Aotearoa? Technically, the marae is a complex in front of the wharenui, so the meeting place, our tupuna. And the marae is, that amongst a whole lot of other things. This is a complex of papakainga, so housing, wharekai, the kitchen and dining space, the urupa, the cemetery, amongst a whole lot of other things. And pre-colonial times, the marae was kind of the centre of any tribe or community. And those are just kind of the physical parts of the marae, right? Like what I have explored in some of my mahi is some of the more intangible qualities of the marae, such as the spiritual connection, the whakapapa, the Māori and Wairoa of these spaces, and also some of the values that come along with these spaces. So today, marae use, they're kind of the space, one of the spaces that Māori can go to and kind of lean back into some of these traditional methods, which we don't live with in our day-to-day anymore in these modern times. So my kind of proposition or hunch was looking at how we could possibly look at these daunting changing environments and how can we bring this idea of the marae, the community, for all of us in Aotearoa through these ideals of reciprocity, utu, and the connection to the whenua, the land, the connection to he tangata, the people, right? Because that's what's so important here. I think for a lot of my mahi towards the beginning, where I had the privilege of working with a lot of people who are still affected by some of these crazy, devastating flooding experiences, amongst amongst our other climate issues, it kind of just became super clear that the people are kind of the key part, and making sure that you're working with the people and also making sure you're uplifting their voices. Us as the architects, the tautoko, another thing you said, Eljyana, I don't know if we have the solutions yet. I don't know if our solutions in the past are what we need to bring forward to kind of combat some of these new environments that we're facing, and they're literally here. So what this may mean for the role of the architect is to lean into what is so unique only to here, Te Ao Māori, and some of these methods that are not new, just kind of listening and having those connections to Papa Tuanuku, the Earth Mother, and Ranginui, the Sky Father, and the whakapapa, so pulling through all those lineages and pūrākau stories. So there are some amazing stories which speak to our changing environments and natural disasters that speak so far back, 500 years or so. And they kind of talk of our tupuna who have overcome some of these kind of times. And in our urban space, as a marae is not just an object, it is not just the buildings. What does it mean as a community to kind of maybe reshape our urban spaces with these kind of values and principles?
So with the recent events, was it February, March, feels like an age ago now, up in Heretaunga, where we saw, or particularly around Heretaunga, we saw the marae being used not just for iwi Māori as a place of refuge and connection. We also saw it being used for the whole community. Any thoughts on that, thinking about the future of how we might shape the relational dimension of towns and cities?
You had it on the head, Hannah. So when I was saying that the marae is for everyone, it is for, in times of these desperate times, these times of disaster, the marae did open its doors quite commonly to house and feed and sleep people in times of distress. And in other instances, speaking with some whānau and tauranga moana, the hapu there were the first responders to some of the natural disasters, and they were the first ones to show up. And that's just kind of in our makeup, ingrained in us, that kaitiakitanga, so that guidance and protection. So
I think what's really compelling about what you're doing, and I know because I'm her supervisor, is, among other people, Rosie Scott and Ramika Tukuna from Alexander, is adapting the methods of architectural, I want to use the word representation, but that is actually incorrect, of expression. So it's actually finding ways to draw, and I literally mean draw out the relations that we might say conventional forms of architectural drawing don't kind of represent. So watch this space.
Quickly?
Yes,
do I have time?
quickly.
Thank you for stringing me along and edging me along there. Yes, so in some of this mahi that I've been doing, I've been trying to look at some of our more indigenising methods, such as Māori mapping, which look more at the pūrākau, the stories, our seasonal and navigational skills, and some of our ties there and our histories around that. For our tupuna, it was more about that more transitional, seasonable life, looking into the maramataka, and we would kind of follow the seasons. We were more transitional, adaptable people. How can we bring some of these inspiring ideas through to today and onwards? That's just one method, drawing through whakapapa plotting, pūrākau, etc.
So there's some wonderful cues and clues in your work to date, and I really look forward to you publishing it. Time just goes really quick. You gorgeous wahine really like to talk. Nicole, so question for you. So Nicole, you and your practice have been actually instrumental in introducing not only some wonderful spaces in this city, Pōneke, but foregrounding how important non-human species and reciprocal relationships are to be, the different life forms, that ecology kind of shows us. So you've brought that sort of energy and those sense of relations and connections into the city, and I thank you for that. So with an ecological lens, we can look at the city more by way of relationships or non-human relationships. So the relationships between things, how things are interconnected and interdependent. And we see how we're all interdependent in lots of different ways. So we look at time beyond the workaday or beyond the kind of 24/7 clock when we immerse ourselves in the non-human species around us. So how do you see ecological and relational dimensions of the city as important to shaping the response to climate, changing climates, and the kind of social spatial systems that we inhabit?
So I guess it feels to me, and maybe this is just because our practice is involved in quite a few projects that wear a sustainability sticker on their sleeve. I think most projects today in the built environment industry, you'd be very hard pushed to ignore resilience and sustainability, I think. But from our experience, it has become sort of second nature to think about ecology or have ecological thinking, and that doesn't just necessarily apply to the green stuff and the blue stuff and the furry stuff and the creepy, buggy stuff. It's also just a way of thinking about, as Hannah is saying, everything being interconnected. And when I first came across the idea that, maybe I like plants, maybe I don't want to garden them, but I happily draw them. It was in Sydney, and we were working on a project. I worked for the Government Architect Office in Sydney. We worked on a project called Victoria Park, which has since been called something else. But it was the first time that as a young graduate, I was exposed to this idea of ecological treatment of stormwater. And this was back in the 1990s. I wasn't joking about the 100 years. I really wasn't. So, and getting into that avenue of thinking and how something natural could not just benefit a space from an amenity perspective. There was habitat forming, but it was also actually a functional performative landscape that was doing something that selfishly was doing something for humans. And I think that's where the thinking starts to diversify into, well, why am I just thinking about how that benefits me as a person? What right do I have as this two-legged thing that's pretty hopeless at a lot of stuff? Like, I'm not good at hunting. I would be pretty rubbish. But, how do we start to express in our urban landscapes? And that's where my interest primarily lies, is in urban landscapes. How do we inject something into those spaces that has a much broader outcome and benefit than just us humans? We get some benefit from it as well, but we don't have to get all the benefit, and everything we do doesn't have to be about us. I know we'll probably talk about the planet and, the kind of tai ao in general, our environment, and, where if our environment doesn't survive, nor do we. And so that, I guess, is the big driver to do some of this stuff. I feel like it's sort of come full circle for me. I remember being a young graduate in the, I'm going to say late 90s, maybe in the early 90s, and thinking, this has to be all about endemic Indigenous species, which to some extent is a really important aspect of the work we do. But at the moment we're working on a project, and I work for Wraight and Associates, I should say, and I should also acknowledge the amazing Megan Wraight, who was the founding director of our practice. She is part of the reason why we've kept going, because she had a real drive to connect into this world of, well, what is sustainability about, and what does that mean? What's this resilience thing people are talking about? How do we as landscape architects contribute to that conversation? And I think it's come a little bit full circle for me, because I was probably, I'm not doing any exotic planting, and I still, as a practice, we rarely do plant exotics. But when you're faced with, say, a space that already has a palette of mature exotic vegetation, is the answer to just wipe all of that exotic existing habitat that is supporting bird life and invertebrate and all the rest of it? Is it right to say, okay, we've got to get rid of that? We're now coming in with something that is endemic. In some instances, it is the right answer, but more often than not, what we're faced with currently is thinking about things transitionally, and how over time we can create spaces that are more culturally connected to New Zealand, to Aotearoa, to this space that we're part of, as opposed to feeling like, you're sitting in Sydney with jacarandas when in fact you're in Wellington sitting next to Te Whanganui Atara. So it's about identity as much as it is about sustainability, I think, for us. I'm going to shut up now.
So, Nicole,
I like holding the microphone.
So given, we're in the realm of solving problems here, tell us how to get more trees into Pōneke. And I say that because trees, and sorry if there's any students in the room who get sick of me saying this, but trees are often the oldest thing we have. And look around, and Porirua particularly, look around. Where are they?
Yeah, well, there are none, because I've been there and I couldn't find any. I think there's a number of ways we can do it. Obviously, private property, people will do what they want, but there could be mechanisms within our planning, statutory documents that require a certain amount of coverage would be one way. In terms of the more public spaces, our streets and open space, I think as a society we have to accept that having big areas of unmitigated paving, yes, that might support some aspects of our civic culture, but maybe there's other ways we need to be thinking about our spaces, and that if there was an urban forest, is that still a space that you couldn't, say, have a protest? Okay, be a little more interesting in terms of how people move through the space, but there are ways of introducing microforests. I'm sure a lot of people here in the audience know far more about that technique than I do, but it's about diversity as well, not just having a monoculture of a particular species, but clustering a number of different species in small areas. I think there's just accepting that trees are not should not be placed in as a kind of
they're not singular beasts, are they?
They're
also not singular. Yeah. They live in relation like we all do.
They need to be in communities, like we like to live in communities. They like to live in communities with other trees, with other plant species, with other animals and insects and everything else. But it's also accepting that there is a payoff maybe. I think quite often we're faced with situations where there's a building and a tree quite close to the building, and more often than not the tree goes, the building has to stay. And it's questioning, again, back to what are our values?
I think maybe the question I should have asked is not how do we get more trees, but how do we keep the ones we've got, I guess, because they constantly get chopped down. Thank you. I've got to keep this moving on. I was told that people get itchy feet if we go past our allocated time. Thank you, Nicole. So it's to Libby. I was going to say Libby Porter, who I'm going to ask Libby a little bit about civicness to some extent. But I had a question prepared here for Libby, which was acknowledging that much of your work is about thought leadership, and that on the one hand it shines a light on naturalised settler colonial motifs and white privilege within the planning profession, and on the other, the unlearning of embedded bias and community-led practices that make way for previously unheard voices and directions that might have been unforeseen previously. So can you tell us why you're so motivated by this particular disposition or stance? And have you seen any changes? So what kind of change have you witnessed in your time with planning? And in terms of your ambitions, perhaps tell us a bit about where we should put our creative energy.
Good. So just some small questions.
Yeah, we're solving things here.
Thanks, Hannah. I think I fell into planning. At least that's what it felt like when it was happening. I just sort of ended up there. But I think if I look back on it now without realising what was happening, I think I'm drawn to practices and ways of thinking about the relationship between people and place and people with each other and, all the sort of life world that is place. So I don't mean place in the stripped back context, but in the ways that First Peoples would say in the Australian context, country as a life world, a life force. So I think I'm drawn to that. I've never said this out loud to anyone, so I'll just say it here. It's very safe here. I think I've just been trying to figure out who I am. That is really all it is. This kind of profession seemed to offer possibly a way to do that. It turned out not so much, but I'm trying to keep working with that. So I think I'm drawn to the idea that we're all emplaced. We live on the planet, and so how do we figure out how to live better on the planet? So that was, I suppose, my starting point. I was not that. That's a retrospective view, telling the story backwards. But I think I rapidly discovered on arriving in planning with that kind of sort of nascent idea, was that actually what was going on was that planning and urbanisation were precisely the processes that dislocate us in the forms that we've sort of briefly been discussing. And that those things are terribly harmful, and that therefore the role is not about some kind of Pollyanna idea of using these tools, but really to reckon with the use of those tools as they have been used in the context that we're all talking about. And located
what was it that, sorry to interrupt, but Audre Lorde, you won't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. Yeah, that one. Yeah,
could not say that better. In fact, did not say that better. But exactly that. And so I don't profess to have any tools whatsoever, and I certainly don't think of myself as a thought leader, more kind of bumbling around in the dark and kind of smashing into things occasionally and going, oh, look, we broke that. Maybe that was a good thing we broke that. Let's pick up the pieces and kind of have a look at what happens. So I think I just became interested in, I guess to put it in a more academic way, the ways in which planning and urbanisation creates the conditions for dispossession and displacement and dislocation and disaffectment, is that a word? I made it up, from each other. So it's and those things worry me terribly. As I think they worry us all, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And it's reckoning with those things that has kind of kept me staying with the trouble, keeping at that problem, how to come at it, and how to think with it. has sort of really been what I think I've been trying to do, not all together coherently. And so you asked what I've seen change. I'm not sure about that. I think there's been a lot of change because the world changes all the time, and there's fabulous people like you guys appearing or having always been there, and now I'm meeting you, and many other things besides. So there's wonderful work going on. So there's lots of change. But from in my vocabulary, from the white fella perspective, in mainstream colonial planning and urbanisation in a context like Australia, my feeling is that there's a lot of surface change. There's a lot of gesturing to a lot of performative kind of stuff going on in order that everything stays exactly the same. And that worries me a lot. And so I've seen a lot of change and a lot of non-change change, if that makes any sense
I might
at
be
all.
putting my foot in my mouth here, but it wouldn't be the first time. But sustainability, the term sustain means actually to kind of keep it how it is.
Precisely.
And I've always thought, am I the dumb one here? This is an oxymoron. But anyway, language.
Yeah. Language, exactly.
I mean, nature-based systems. You're going to get me on one in a minute.
Urban greening.
Yeah, greening. Yeah. You've written a lovely paper.
Why, thank you.
A very useful paper about urban greening.
Other people wrote it. I just kind of helped.
Put your name on. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Academic.
So non-change change. And you asked me where should we put our energy. Speaking as a white fella. I think we should put our energy into getting out of the way. You said beautifully in the conference session this morning that something that is really sitting with me in a productive way, and that is we need to learn when to sit down, when to stand up, and when to step aside, and we do that and we learn that with heart. To quote you. And there is something quite profound about that. So to me, that's where our energy needs to be, to learn how to do those things and to learn it with heart, not learn it cerebrally or analytically. Those things are important too. It's not to say they're not useful, but we have to bring our whole selves to figuring out who we are in relationship, because that's the only way we can, build something a better future.
I think there's going to be a new faculty up at the architecture school. It's going to be called the Faculty of Heart. So, yeah. Oh, terrific. Well, I mean, I guess it's my job to kind of pick up some threads in a way. But I thought I'd do something a little bit more maybe flippant and say, hey, what's your favourite place and space? Eljyana? Or you can... say something else.
Before I want to ask Antonia a question in terms of the marae, because this is a concept that we're exploring with our housing block. And we kind of talked about what the scales of that are, so you think about the marae, it has a particular scale to it also in terms of its number of people and the community that it has. My question is of when does that become non-effect? And how I'm trying to think, how do you include that into a block that's maybe a lot smaller, or a city block that's, just doing one project? Are there qualities within that? Is it mainly spiritual at a big size, or is it that, a community can gather in a particular place if we're thinking about urban spaces? And so maybe there's different physical and non-tangible qualities that influence the way that you put that into a city or a house or, yeah.
Cool question. I think I might shoot myself in the foot here, but the marae typically, as I said earlier, kind of is made up of that complex. And if we want to look at it just from that kind of scale that a traditional marae has, and then we are seeing urban marae today as well. I think personally I was looking at the marae from a larger te ao Māori sense and trying to bring in some of those, yes, intangible values such as the ideas around reciprocity, bringing through the Māori and Wairoa, trying to see what that might mean and drawing from through those methods. I think, and it's a tricky place because we don't want to do it wrong, right? But at an urban scale, I think, from a more maybe like village sense, looking at the ideals around the pā. So I was fortunate enough to grow up near a living kind of pā, whakarewarewa and Rotorua, and that pā kind of doesn't really have gates. It's kind of living, kind of talking to what you were saying about this housing system and sharing the kind of outdoor spaces and sharing hangi pits and those more shared spaces, those ideas around balance and reciprocity. So that maybe from the more village sense, at an urban scale, getting even larger, thinking outside the boundaries of the site. I'm not sure. I'm excited to see what it could be.
I mean, it sounds like we're sort of talking, though, in the realm where Cartesian kind of ideas of space are not serving us in the city. So we need to go for the layering, the oceanic understanding of the Samoa and, the Alanga kind of nested sort of idea. And I we wouldn't have a go at saying from a Māori perspective, but it's like the nesting of different spatialities that don't necessarily, and times, the coexistence of different times. How do we bring, that understanding to design of architecture and buildings and cities? There's the question.
Can I chime in on that? Because the place that I've been, to go to your question, the place that I've been thinking about as a answer to your question, that is, I don't know whether it's my favourite place in the city, but it's a place that is helping me. It kind of speaks to that little conversation that we were just having. It's a site on the banks of the Merri Creek, which flows into the Birarung, which is the main river that now winds through Melbourne. It's on Wurundjeri country. It's just adjacent to a public housing estate that was knocked down a few years ago actually not all that long ago, a couple of years ago, under a big, awful, violent renewal program that the Victorian government's advancing, which it's now doing en masse. But the site itself sits on this really beautiful part of the Merri that is terribly despoiled by colonial capitalism, of course, with a massive rock face cliff, beautiful boulders, and the way the Merri comes around the sort of bend there. To me, really feels like a place where you can kind of learn with the place. And it just also happens to be near the place where an early invader called John Batman signed a fraudulent treaty, in inverted commas, with Wurundjeri people near that site. And that and the co-location with this public housing estate is just helping me think through some of those layers of time, layers of different kinds of responsibility and response to place, and what that place can teach us about who we are and the sort of genealogy of place, I suppose, and what our accountabilities are there. So that's a current favourite place in the city.
Nice. We were going to talk about what might the city look like in 500 years. That was for Antonia, who actually the scope of her projective tools at the moment are looking at 500-year kind of time frame. Is that right? That's right, isn't it? Yes, that's right. So what do we think about the future, Nicole?
So a different one to what Kevin Costner told us a wee while ago. I think definitely and this is probably just a symptom of my focus currently, because I am quite heavily involved in a project in Te Wakaue, and it's all about the water, it's all about the trees. I just think our city spaces will need to be driven by a necessity for shade. I think we're entering into a phase where we won't be able to regulate our body temperatures, and maybe we're beyond that in 500 years' time. Maybe we've already sorted that out. One thing I have always appreciated working, doing co-design with iwi partners on the various projects that we're involved with, they have this much longer view, like it's intergenerational, it feels intergalactical sometimes, like they are just looking so far ahead. We're quite often working on projects where it's, what's happening in the next election? We've got to get this thing built before then.
The building code.
Yeah, they're not thinking about that stuff. They're thinking about their mokopuna. They're thinking about their mokopunas. It's been quite a revelation to think in those terms. I don't think I've answered the question because I kind of have no idea, but I think there's going to be some trees. I think there's going to be epiphytes. I think there's going to be a lot of epiphytes. Our office is just on a little bit of an epiphyte binge at the moment. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a plant that can basically grow off not very much water, no soil, and quite often sticks itself to another tree or some other kind of could be a natural element, but could be something that's unnatural. Can you have anyway? So epiphytes. That's the future.
And hybrid ecologies. Nice. I'm feeling like a cyborg with all these things on. Well, time is of the essence. I mean, I would love to hear so much more from everyone, but I'd really like to take the opportunity to for questions, from the floor. So we've got sort of 10 or so minutes remaining. So we wanted a healthy amount of time to develop some dialogue with some of the things that are on your mind. So, Ngāmihi, welcome to share. I think there's some roving mics.
You may need to borrow some.
We're hogging them. Thank you, Graham.
So if you have a question, please just raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone over to you and you can speak a question into the microphone so that our audience in the live stream can hear. First question.
Yeah, kia ora. Great panel. Thanks for talking with us. My question has kind of been raised in a number of ways, maybe not dealt with directly, is about those urban renewal projects at scale that our government is doing, including in Australia as well. And there's lots of opportunity, presented as a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of harm and disruption at the same time. So I'm curious just to hear the panel's view on those. Because, they're working at scale in a way that doesn't really, those opportunities aren't around so much to work at that kind of scale. But at the same time, there's a lot of damage kind of accruing. So I'm keen to hear just your thoughts on urban renewal at scale and what that means from your different kinds of places that you're speaking from. Kia ora.
It's really disheartening, actually. I've been in a number of meetings that I'm like, they just don't get it. Like, they're just doing the same thing after the same thing. And I'm like, so I try to keep calm, but also not keep calm. So, we're working in a block where it's divided into a grid. So you've got state, and then there's market, and we are the market, which is affordable housing. But that's actually not mixed tenure. Like, they think that it's mixed tenure, but it's not. And so, there's a whole piece in terms of trying to introduce different housing opportunities of where one block is actually mixed tenure. All of those 6 blocks are actually mixed. But it does take, I think it will take a real deep understanding of the community and actually advocating in those spaces, but also being independent enough to have agency that you're operating outside of the government, because we can't, we've relied on it for a long time. But my suggestion is that they can do the infrastructure. They just pay for all the pipes in the wetlands, and then they give us all the tenants, and then we work with the families to as a community housing provider, work with them, but also along their individual housing journeys. And then, you know, what the jobs are. You know, there's a whole lot of like other opportunities in terms of jobs and skills, but not just in trades, because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. It's where are the jobs and skills with the architects, the consultants, the engineers, and that takes a lot longer. So it is coming back to the intergenerational thing, is like, as an organisation, how is the actual board structure thinking intergenerationally? So you've got the CE, you've got whoever else, you've got me, whoever else is in there. And so you're all on the same waka, but you're thinking much longer term, because it is like you have people and you have development managers that are in kāinga order, they're there for 2 years, 3 years, you know, it's just a job. And so I think actually having skin in the game in terms of us as a community organisation for assets, you know, assets by the word, you know, we can actually make an influence in what we're investing back into the community. That's one idea.
Can I add something?
Totally.
Just from the across the water perspective, I mean, I think what is happening in Victoria is very much reminiscent of other places that do the kind of blank slate, you know, terra nullius kind of idea of urban renewal, which is deeply harmful and really quite violent. So an example is the little site that I talked about, but the latest iteration of that was the announcement by the Victorian government a couple of months ago in what was called Victoria's Housing Statement, which was a proposal that they're taking forward to demolish all the remaining public housing towers in Melbourne, all 44 of them, and displace 12,000 people from their communities in the name of renewal, because those communities have been stigmatised as, you know, and the buildings are, you know, not fit for purpose, all of things, blah, 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 usual stuff. But that kind of mentality of a blank slate and that the only solution is a kind of, you know, state or market kind of solution that leaves no room for the actual practices of belonging and dwelling and relationship and being in place are really harmful, which is where I think you were connecting to. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, big question. Do we have any other questions? Because we could talk about that a lot. Oh, there we are.
Thank you so much. That has been amazing and so thought-provoking. I think my question is about history. I know the panel is about futures, but I'm actually interested in your take on the extent to which history matters, and history in the kind of broad sense. So, you know, you could interpret it however you want in a way. I guess my thinking on history is, you know, the kind of both the colonial histories and the First Nations histories, and where they meet each other and where they don't, and how you take seriously history when you think about the future, if that makes sense. Anyways, yeah.
Well, history's always got to be multiple, right? Yeah, but who would like to take that one?
I might be taking it off on a slightly different tangent to the question's intent, but I think, you know, history is always teaching us lessons, usually about how stupid we're being in the present. If we take Wellington as an example, and here I'm going to sort of bring it back to ecology rather than necessarily social or cultural histories. The streams, the historical streams that ran through the city, we're now faced with some infrastructure that's not very happy. It's and that's not just stormwater, it's sewer and also our potable water as well. But the fact that we're just sort of cottoning on to the fact that all of the places that get flooded on a frequent basis, that all those streets are where our streams naturally ran historically. And I think there has, and this is not something that's very recent, we've all just suddenly realised there are streams. This has been thinking about this has been happening for decades, but thinking about how investigating where those natural systems once lay, what that actually means for the any kind of change to our city form and our urban structure now needs to take account of that. There's a lot of talk about daylighting streams, and that might be a really good thing, but we might have to also think about other alternatives to that and how we address all those issues, which will always be connected to climate change issues as well. But someone else might want to take. I don't feel like I'm in a space where I can talk confidently about cultural histories, since I feel like I have very little. Over to my esteemed colleagues.
I guess taking it on a completely different route, just on the topic of history, I feel like I have to acknowledge just our literal current political situation we're in as of recently, and kind of the scary, painful space we might be in for Te Tiriti and us, Māori and Pacifica, and our generation, I guess. And a lot of, I'm sure you guys have seen some of the protests that have been happening this week. So just to tautoko, that our New Zealand history in terms of settler colonialism is kind of pretty short, less than 200 years, and the fact that it's been a pretty scarring, scary space for my tupuna, for my nan, and we've also got to learn from our short history. As of recently, we've come a long way as well, but we've also got a long way to go, and it kind of seems like we might be going backwards a little bit. But how do I bring this back around? In terms of our urban space, just maybe, I don't know.
I mean, if you think geographically of how the European map is, I often think and in some ways it's true, we're at New Zealand, Aotearoa, we're at the end of the earth, but we are also the first ones to see the sun. And so I think in many ways we have been slow to some things, but also there is a lot of hope for us to project and to be the ones that kind of shine the light of everything that we've been talking about tonight. So
well, on that very positive and uplifting note, we've got to 7:30 almost on the dot. So I really want to thank you all for coming in and attending this or holding this space with us. I'd also really like to thank Amelia, particularly in the NZIA Wellington branch, for paying for everything and supporting us, and Graham and his crew here at the gallery. What a beautiful job you've done. So we feel really well hosted, so thank you. And to the SOAC crew down the front here, Becky, would you like to come and give the koha? Kia ora, Becky. Rebecca Kittle, one of the chairs of the SOAC conference, is the chair, the right convener. I don't know the correct term. But Becky, welcome to give the gifts. Yes.
Just to say, sorry, I was late. My baby was very concerned about me being in the same place as him, so I had to deal with him crying as I fled the house. But just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Thank you particularly to these fabulous speakers. What I caught of it was just a fascinating conversation, and so great to hear all those different perspectives, and particularly great to hear some rangatahi perspectives as well. So thank you very much for your time and your mātauranga. In particular, thank you to Hannah for such a well-run and very provocative set of questions for our panel. So kia ora koutou. We've just got a little quarter.
Thank you, everybody.